Good. Well, welcome everybody, and welcome to this first chat on the Dog Centered Care channel for a little while. And thank you for bearing with me while I've been dealing with some of my own things, some of my own health things and stuff. But I've been really keen to get back into kind of talking through some really important areas for us to consider when we share our lives with animals, but also ones that reflect back on ourselves. So I couldn't think of anybody better to start this next batch of talks than my good friend Karin. Hi, Karin.
Hello, Andy. It's so nice to be back. It's so nice to see you up and running again. You've been missed, so it's lovely to be in touch with you again.
Well, yes. Well, and I think, with so many things happening within behavioral science, I think these conversations are needed again. I think we just got to keep reminding ourselves while we're doing these kind of things. So if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to say hi, oh, great. Hi, Zoe. Good. Yes, please say hi in the chat. You have to be a subscriber. It's just that way I can moderate who kind of says hi and things. But you can subscribe, click on the button, and then you can start chatting away. So good. Great, Karen. Right. So now I have to express an element of interest here because I loved your book when I read it. I loved your conversation on this channel, but Robert had the joy of speaking with you last time, part of
Yeah.
his series. And I've had the absolute joy of doing the MHERA practitioner course as well. And this is why I wanted to get you on because I really believe in what MHERA is, what it represents, what it affords us. And in a place where there's a lot of models coming online now, I think this is one that's very simple in operation, but actually is very thorough in its outlook, but it's also very intuitive and it's very accessible. So I think we should dive in with a little bit of a history on MHERA. I think you mentioned Robert. It's good to give a nod to MHERA, I think, that came before. So do you want to kind of start from there and just say a little bit about the development?
Absolutely. Well, yes, without Robert and Peter and Emra, there wouldn't be a Mira. They provided the foundation, and I have been so fortunate to have had input from brilliant minds like Robert, who way back when I started studying this, I'm not going to say how many years ago because that'll give away my age. I got to spend a lot of time with Robert. And so he's always been a really important person in my life when it comes to what I do and how I view things. So being able to kind of when I inherited um, Cope and everything else, it was big shoes to fill. But I've been very lucky that they've always been accessible and have always been there to help. And so, after applying EMRA for such a very long time, I remember saying to one of them, I can't remember who I was speaking to, but I remember saying to one of them, sometimes it feels like there's just a little bit of something missing. And I went out and I applied it and practice, practice makes perfect. And then about, I think, 15 years ago, the concept for Mira started taking place and it started forming in my head. And then I had another conversation with Carolina Westland, who's another really good friend. And Carolina made a comment. I remember I was sitting outside in the sunshine on my lawn in the garden outside. And I was talking to her and I said to her, I've got this framework picture in my head, but what I need to make it come to life is the technology of Tony Stark in Iron Man, because what I need is to be able to shift things and throw it up into the air and turn it around and make it bigger and make it smaller. And she listened to all of this and then in typical Carolina style said, well, if you tilt it 45 degrees, it fits. And all the dominoes in my head just went tick, 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 tick. So Mira has been a concept that, yes, started with Emra and then had input from people like Robert, like people from Carolina, people who just made valuable contributions to make the picture and all the puzzle pieces fit.
Let's clarify EMRA. So when Robert and his colleagues thought about EMRA, this is a time when there was a very kind of behaviorism outlook to behavior, which was very structured about just whether we get more behavior or not and how we look at managing those kind of those the things that operationalized around behavior. Robert came, the thing with Emra, he put emotions first. So
Yeah.
emotion, mood, reinforcement, assessment. So understanding that emotion and mood are more important than any extrinsic kind of motivation there, because it matters to the individual. And it was interesting speaking to Robert at that time. So many people within the science community, especially, were like, God, don't go there. Remember, we have to remember that 15 years ago or so or more, even the mention of emotions in animal behavioral science literature wouldn't get peer reviewed.
Oh, absolutely.
It
It
was a
was a
tough
big
time.
no-no.
So
Yeah.
Robert he really went there. And I think it's important that we let people know what the letters are. So, like you say, something there was not, well, yeah, missing or needed a little bit of reconsideration. And the thing with MHERA, so we got the MHERA. So do you want to go through those words maybe that make up MHERA, and then why you have reorganized things and put a new emphasis on something?
Okay. So MHERA is the acronym for mood state analysis, hedonic budget assessment, emotionality and reinforcement assessments. And what the new acronym does is it's to show people the order in which they need to actually do the assessment. So we start off looking at mood, and a very important part of mood is cognitive bias, and that's a new thing. New, I mean, I'm talking 5, 10 years now that it's been added. Um, and so when we look at mood, the reason why that needs to be first is because that is your base state that you start having any emotional responses from. And if we can work with animals and get them in a mood state where they're feeling a little bit more in control, they feel like they've got the ability to make choices, they're actually in a good mood, or at least a stable mood, it allows us to help them to deal with whatever it is that they're struggling with more. So for me, it's really important that we always address mood first before we start looking at the individual behaviors that might be problematic for people. I'm not a big fan of the word behavior problems. And I think I said this last time as well, because it's not. You know, a dog having a doing something that the guardian doesn't like doesn't necessarily have a behavior problem. He's often got an emotional complication or a challenge or something that he doesn't know how to deal with. So, I'll use the word, but I just want to clarify that it's not a favorite term of mine. But for me, looking at mood first is the part that needs to be prioritized, because anything, I always liken it to building a house. The mood, stabilizing the mood, getting the animal into a position where he's capable of learning, responding, adjusting, making better choices is like laying the foundation. Anything you build on top of that is either going to work or not. If your foundation is wobbly, it's going to fall over. If your foundation is solid and the cat has a certain amount of behavioral resilience that's been cultivated through the facilitation of this mood, then you're far more likely to be able to help them. Jumping straight to the problem behavior is a little bit like applying a band-aid to a gunshot wound. You know, you're not going to solve the real root, you're not getting to the real root cause of what's going on. And so that's why mood had to be first. And then an important part of mood is cognitive bias. And this is where Mike Mendel's work kind of came across my field of vision. And I stumbled into um, the wondrous world of core affect space and dimensional models of emotionality. And it was something that to me just filled in all the cracks. It completed the picture. Having these two models of emotionality and combining them, to me, it was like all the pieces coming together and going, okay, so this allows us to look at everything that's happening to an animal, not just through what we think is happening, but also how is the animal experiencing what's happening to them, or what's being done to them. And so those two kind of pieces came together, and that created the whole acronym and the way that we address everything.
Can we unpack that a little bit? I think because this is really important because it is that blending together of discrete and dimensional models into one space that we can look at, and because obviously you have those two different kind of camps, initially, and it's bringing those two areas in so that we can plot an element of mood state in the moment is as a reaction, but also where that baseline is. And this is very important because the thing about cognitive bias, especially that difference between pessimistic and optimistic biases, is crucial because anybody who works with reactivity will know you can do as much as you want with what you think you're counter conditioning or whatever you're doing. But if that dog has a pessimistic bias to things within the social environment, if that doesn't change, they still got it.
Yeah.
And the thing about a pessimistic bias, it doesn't necessarily mean that anything bad's going to happen, but you're not predicting something good will, which again has challenges for reinforcement training. So can we explore core affect space a little bit? Is it worth bringing up an element of that? I don't know whether you've got something you can show us to visualize it, or I
I
have something if needs be, something I put together based on what I learned from you.
Oh, well, then I'd love to see. And
Well,
I'm going to
that's a bit like showing the school teacher your work, isn't it?
well, you offered, so
I
I'm going
offered
to
it.
take you up
Okay,
on
let's
that.
see if I've done you justice. Shall we see? Let's have a look. Let's see if I've
No
done you
pressure at
justice.
all, of
No,
course.
I put this together because you were coming on, and I just wanted to. Uh, it was more for my own remembrance, really. Let's have a look. Make that large, and then see what you think. Have I done you justice there?
Oh, I like that. Let me see. Anticipate something good.
But
Don't anticipate anything bad. Don't anticipate good. Definitely. Yeah, I like that.
and
Um,
we've got the PanSCEP seeking circuits as well, which is something you've kind of added in. I've
yeah.
added in a little bit with my notion of, I think you mentioned relief anyway, but that is what relief is, and that return to safety. But
I
one
think
thing
you've done a really good job. That looks really nice.
well, talk us through it a little bit then. Talk us
Okay,
through it a little bit.
right. So effectively what we do, I'm going to kind of reference this back to cognitive bias so that it makes a little bit more sense for people. Yeah. So when we look at the dimensional model of emotionality, we're basically working on the axis of both arousal and valence. Arousal refers to the degree of emotional and physical disinhibition, whereas valence refers to emotional content. So on this side of the screen where it says Q1 and Q2, that's what we call positive valence. In other words, to put it really simply, good feelings. And Q4 and Q3 is where we have negative valence feelings. And then the further out on, at least for the MHERA graph, the further out on these kind of axes you go, the more intense the emotional response. And so when we're talking about cognitive bias, this is how an animal responds to ambiguous stimuli, and it is something that permeates every element of their behavior. I love that you've got the four different explanations of what each quadrant means. I always like to say that Q1 would be your optimistic extrovert, and Q2 would be your introverted optimist. Yeah. Q3 introverted pessimist. Q4 extroverted pessimist. And all of this, basically, what it translates into is how do you view things that happen to you when you're not 100% certain about what they are? Q1 dogs are the ones that, they see something new, they're expecting it automatically to mean something great. So they bound on over, they're excited, they want to investigate, life is great. This is going to be something fantastic. And those guys, they're the ones that we need to work on to teach to be a little bit calmer, to settle down, to engage in activities that function around rest and relaxation. When we look at the Q2 animals, these are the ones that see ambiguous stimuli and they go, all right, well, it's probably nothing bad. So I'll stroll on over. I am emotionally inhibited. I'm interested, but I'm not kind of bouncing off the ceiling with excitement. And again, perfectly fine, no problem. The Q3 ones and the Q4 ones are the ones where we need to be so careful. Q3 animals are the ones that look at novelty or anything ambiguous, and their automatic response is, this is probably nothing good. And with that, what I often see in Q3, and this is kind of why my heart breaks for Q3 animals, their initial response is often to do what I like to call ostriching. So I'm just going to pretend it's not there. I didn't see it, it's not there, or I'm going to look away, I'm going to just completely pretend like there's nothing there, and if I don't look at it, then maybe it goes away. Or I'm going to be very hesitant about approaching it or investigating it or taking chances because I'm not expecting this to mean anything good. Q4 guys are often easier to spot because they're expecting whatever it is that they're encountering to mean bad things. Now, obviously, with this level of emotional arousal, the more aroused they are, the more difficult it is to work with them. But for me, the reason why those of us who work with animals need to take this into consideration is, let me give you an example. When we are working with MHERA, one of the categories that we look at is the hedonic budget. And there are certain things on the hedonic budget that we measure that contribute to well-being. And one of those things is the activation of the seeking system. And the seeking system has two different categories that we assess on. The first one is any kind of resource acquisition behavior, and the other one is exploring a novelty, because those are the big things that kind of get the seeking system going. If you have a Q3 animal, let's say a Q3 cat, let's bring in cats for a change, and you look at the cat's hedonic budget and you go, oh my goodness, there's not enough seeking system activation going on here. We need to provide him with lots and lots of novelty. And you're dealing with a Q3 animal whose bias says if it's unfamiliar or it's ambiguous, it's bad news. Are you actually doing him a favor? Are you improving his life? Or are you adding more things for him to be worried about? Are you affecting his safety and his safe space and his ability to cope? And so for me, that's why the bias is something that was kind of, I couldn't fit it into the acronym because there's just no way to pronounce it. So I decided, because it's kind of part of mood state, we'll just include cognitive bias assessment as part of mood state, because it is an absolute critical factor, because cognitive bias tells us how fast do we work with this animal? How quickly can we incorporate changes? How much can we expect from them? Because an animal who's in Q3 or Q4, they are not able to adjust as quickly. They're not as responsive as Q1 or Q2 animals. And those are the ones that are often labeled as, oh, you can't work with them, tried everything, nothing's working, they're stubborn, or they refuse to listen, and all those kinds of things. And that's where the less supportive, harsher methods of dealing with them are often then brought in, because the nice way doesn't work. And that's not the case at all. It's just a question of, I can't cope with this right now. And very often what then happens is, because bad things happen, you end up with a dog or a cat who's completely shut down. And that is for the worst part about not taking bias into consideration. It affects everything, and when we look at mood, the mood that an animal finds himself in is effectively his starting point for any emotional experience that he's going to have. And if he's in a bad mood, or he's in a mood that doesn't contribute to well-being and doesn't have him in either Q1 or Q2, it's difficult for them to just participate. It's difficult for them to just respond. I always like saying that, if you had to think, so with MHERA, let me just backtrack a little bit. What we do with MHERA is we measure arousal on a scale of 0, which would be in the middle of the cross, where you've got arousal and valence, right? So that would be your 0. That would be the point where there is absolutely no emotional content. There's no valence. So we measure that from 0 to plus 20, which is the highest end of the graph that you can go for arousal, and then minus 20, which is the lowest level of emotional, behavioral, and physiological arousal you can get. That is not the same as 0. If you are thinking about the lowest level of arousal with positive valence, that would be me on a beach in December in South Africa, where all I'm doing is, I just want to lie in the sun. I don't want to move. I don't want to think. I just want to, I like to call it my nothing box. I am deeply content when I'm lying on a beach in the sun. It's a nice place to be, but you can't live there, because there's no food there, there's no water, there are no resources, there's no shelter. So it's a place that you visit, right? That is the kind of the least level of arousal that you can get. From a negatively valenced perspective, that level of low arousal would be utter despair, where the individual is beyond even capable of motivating themselves to get out of bed. That would be the kind of emotional state that we're looking at, the mood state that we're looking at there. When we're looking at highest level of arousal, Positively valenced, we're talking about terms like ecstatic, almost mania. That's the
Mm.
degree of arousal that you see there. And then for Q4, where we've got the negative valence, we either see animals who are, or people that are enraged or terrified to the point where no learning happens. So the further out you go on this graph, the more intense the emotional experience. And that's not a place that's conducive to any kind of learning. I mean, it's okay to visit, but you don't want to live there, like I said. And so when we measure behaviors like this, we want to make sure that mood state is ideally in a place where the animal is not too much of anything. And we want to, depending on what we want to ask of them, we want to create situations where they can respond, want to respond, and are able to learn. And that's why we need to start with mood, because it is the kind of the most important point to begin. Because if you don't fix that, well, everything else you're going to try and stick on there is just not going to work.
This is very relevant for us, of course, because I think about in my kind of previous life supporting humans and people who are kind of in that Q3 as their set point of where they're at. And the thing is, as you know, you can travel through this space, but it's where it's that where you return to that point of generalness, general mood. And if you have somebody who's this is the challenge for working with people who are depressed and who do have certain anxieties about the world and do have those pessimistic biases because they can experience positive things. They can travel into other spaces, but without that general mood state change, they return back to that place.
Yeah,
And actually trying to encourage through reinforcement. If you're not predicting something good, that's challenging because you're not necessarily considering the positive outcome of that. It becomes performative a little bit.
yeah,
And that's very connected to hedonic budget again, which I think is a term that people might not necessarily have considered or have heard before, but it's crucial when working with, well, for ourselves, but also with animals, I think. And we were talking off air about all of us pretty well will have experienced that dip in our hedonic budget because of lockdowns. You know, the lack of access to do the things that brought us joy, that we connected things, the things that we really enjoy doing, different activities. And you can imagine that animal who is constantly deprived of doing those things that they are either bred to do or want to do or enjoy doing in the pursuance of obedience and behaving, or because the environment doesn't allow it, if they're in that kind of a confined space. You can see how that would affect mood state, how you'd end up in that kind of Q3 space.
absolutely. And I think, like we were discussing a little bit earlier, COVID gave us the unique opportunity to really empathize with what a lot of animals go through on a day-to-day basis, where there's no choice, there's no control, there's very little access to the things that contribute to your overall well-being. And that's, look, I'm going to be honest with you, I love the hedonic budget. To me, it is such an invaluable tool that is just, as far as I'm concerned, it should be part of everybody's kind of vocabulary. Because actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hijack your screen share for a
Yeah, let's
moment,
stop my share. Hang on a second, and then we'll put yours up.
just so that I can quickly show people what the hedonic budget looks like. All right. Can you see my screen?
I can, yes, brilliant.
Okay, great stuff. So this is basically what the hedonic budget looks like. And these are all the things that we measure. And what you'll notice on here is there are very few specific behaviors that we look at. And that's because, I mean, there are so many different behaviors that animals exhibit that if you had to try and plot every single one of them, you are going to end up with a list that is 173 pages long. So instead of looking at specific actions, because also let's face it, different postures can mean different things in animals. So for the hedonic budget, what I decided to look at is all the things that contribute to well-being, and particularly the systems in the brain that influence well-being significantly. And that is what we measure on the MHERA hedonic budget. Um, so we look at, when I talk about seeking system activation, this is PANCSIP, it's PANCSIP 101. And the
Mhm.
seeking system is one of the oldest systems in the brain. It is the system that has everything to do with motivation. And, getting things. And so for the purposes of well-being, because the seeking system is always a little bit on, and it's also the thing that helps you to find safety when you're being chased by something big with teeth. But that's not necessarily contributing to your well-being. It's more a case of that's keeping you alive. So we don't measure seeking system activation for survival strategies, because the hedonic budget purely looks at how often do activities happen that originate from these specific places that contribute to your well-being, that makes you feel good. And so the first category that we look at is hunting/foraging. It's basically resource acquisition. It's just the straightforward way to say anything that this dog does that results in him obtaining a resource, particularly surrounding food acquisition behaviors, because that's such an important part of life. You need to perform things to get stuff to put in your mouth to survive. So we look at things like training, provided, of course, it's the right kind of training. We look at food dispensing toys. We look at the opportunity to perform any kind of sequence of your predator motor pattern. And these are all behaviors that happen within the seeking system. So we look at how much time per day do you spend doing this? And then the next thing that we look at is the context of seeking for exploring a novelty. The seeking system is fantastic for helping to create habits. But once habits have been created, the amount or the degree of activation for seeking system, if I can put it very layman terms, is not as pronounced. So novelty and the opportunity to explore is the stuff that happy dogs are made of, and happy cats and happy gorillas and elephants and all those, everything that has the seeking system. And so we want to measure specifically how much opportunity do you get in your day-to-day life to explore, to engage with novelty. And something that I've noticed a lot about here is when you talk to clients and you say to them, tell me about your dog's day. What do you do? Do you take him for a walk? Yes, absolutely. Every day at 4 o'clock, we go for a walk around the block. That is exercise. If it's familiar and the dog knows 4 o'clock, we're going for a walk and it's the same route every day, you are not actually meeting seeking system in the context of exploring a novelty, because it's predictable. As soon as something is predictable, as soon as it's routine, it doesn't tick this box anymore. But of course, this is the double-edged sword that I was talking about earlier, because if you have an animal with a pessimistic cognitive bias, this is also a category that you need to meet very, very slowly and very, very carefully. Because if you do too much too soon, you're doing damage. So that's what we look at there. Play, of course, I love play. Play is one of my favorite things to sit and watch in animals, because it's just warm and fuzzy and wonderful. And I think the facial expression for play is always a smile on the observer's face. I've never seen somebody watching animals play with a frown on their faces and not looking happy. So it's that whole feeling of joy that accompanies it. So we measure 3 different kinds of play. On the hedonic budget, we look at social play, which is any kind of social play. As long as there's another living being involved, that contributes to your well-being. And we look at locomotory play, we look at object play, because different things also, it's all to do with activities that you do that makes you feel good. We look at relationships between other animals and between people. We then also include grooming that is either received or given by the guardian. We look at self-grooming. We look at mutual grooming, because that tells us about the relationship between animals, if there are several animals living in the household. And then we have our 3 welfare elements that we consider. So eating, drinking, and then sleeping and resting. And what all of this does, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You think I know this off by heart. It's 13 things that we look at, 13 categories that we look at. But this is what they spend a lot of their time doing every day. And look, MHERA was designed to make it easier for people to access the science of dimensional and discrete models of emotionality. I wanted to create a framework that acts as an intuitive but fluid system that guide people to look at emotions from every angle, So not just how you're feeling in general, but how you're feeling right now. What makes you happy? What do you get out of doing things? And that's kind of what the whole framework was designed to do, was to provide step-by-step guidance for people, um, to help them to get the bigger picture. And then, of course, with the emotionality assessment part of MHERA, that's where we track how animals experience emotional fluctuations throughout the course of something happening to them. And that is a really nice tool for making sure that we never push them beyond what they're capable of. It's nice for measuring progress, because something that I've noticed is we're always quick to see the big things, the big successes, the big changes. And sometimes you're lucky and you do get the big changes quickly. But sometimes it takes a long time. And the cases where it takes a long time to get a little bit of progress, those are often the ones where the guardians become disheartened, because they go, we're not seeing any change. We're doing all this work and there's no change and there's no progress. And sometimes the progress is a millimeter in the right direction on a graph that you can plot. And that's enough to show them that over the last 3 months, look, there has been change. This is how this is how he felt originally. This is how he's feeling now. And so we can actually use all of these tools to help people to understand their animals better and to see what's going on with them from a more holistic perspective.
And that's important, isn't it? Really important because uh, to see those little changes, which actually in that particular context, they could be huge changes, even though they might measure small. You have to have a mindset, you have to have a perspective to see it and to understand it. Where I think the general public and still big swathes of dog training, especially, are just stuck on pure kind of behavior on or off,
Yeah.
rather than the subtleties of shifts and changes and recovery rates and intensity and context and all the nuances that show us whether that there still might be an element of dysregulation there, but there's an element of being able to come back to a form of regulation through self again and finding those little ways through. And I think it's very important for us working with the general public to offer them something that is beyond this notion of just behavior on and off. Because you're talking about cognitive biases at the beginning, of course, negative bias is a big one for our clients. We could have a dog who might respond by barking and lunging at other dogs all the time, and then through a process, even if that dog went past, say, 5 or 6 dogs and was able to find a different way of being able to cope, if they barked at the last dog on the walk, they will go home feeling that it's not working,
Mm.
because they think, oh, somehow just because the dog has behaved, that somehow that is a failure of process. I
Yeah.
just want to come back to seeking before we move on a little bit, because I think it's very interesting. um, when I did the MHERA course with you, it was brilliant for me because it took me back to a lot of the stuff I'd learned from Panskep and others, and the things I'd already knew about the separately the discrete and dimensional models. And you brought these strands together in such an accessible way, and you have a great way when you're giving your little analogies and examples to kind of see it. And I think I hadn't thought about seeking in the way that I do now until I'd been on your course. I just want to look at this because I think it's very important for us with dogs and the mood state more generally is to understand what happens if those seeking circuits, when activated, are not finding outcomes that are liked by the seeking circuit on a regular basis. Because I read a piece of research recently, actually looking at children who, by giving them more choices, there was really obvious and observable reductions in their tantrums, which you describe very beautifully about those seeking circuits. When some of those outcomes aren't there, the rage circuits may take over, which
Mm.
is frustration, of course.
Yeah.
And if you think about a dog on some walks when they're just wanting to explore this or check that or seek out things within that environment and they're not being allowed to, how that builds over time and shifts that mood state. And a lot of dogs that we work with, they're just quite angry.
Yeah.
They're
But
in that
wouldn't it
angry
be?
Q4 state. But that's the point. And we see that with children, this kind of looking at this thing I read recently, it kind of makes sense because when that child is having that moment in the shop because they've been told no, they can't have something and they're throwing themselves on the floor, it's not about that. It's about a whole day of not having any agency, not having those seeking circuits, be able to explore and find out things and get some of that feedback from the environment.
It is, that is so true. Just to go back to your example of dogs that are so angry all the time, I kind of, the nice thing about Mira and kind of just emotion science in general is it's something that we can identify with quite closely as humans, because effectively, I mean, the mammalian brain is the mammalian brain. And yes, there are differences, of course, but I always try and put myself. Look, I'm not a big fan of using complicated terminology when I'm speaking to normal people, regular guardians and things like people like that, because I feel that there's so much terminology out there that kind of shut down. So I like to use, like you said, lots of little personal snippets. And if you, I love riding horses, for example. If you took me past horses all the time, and I can smell them and I can see them, but every time I try and reach them, I'm prevented from doing so. At some point, one of two things are going to happen. I'm going to go, all right, fine, I'm just never going to get to a horse again and resign myself to that loss of something that I enjoy tremendously. Or, which is far more likely to happen, my inner redhead will come out roaring, and I too will be furious and dangerous in an attempt to actually get to something that makes me happy. And then you think about some of these dogs that start off being super social and they love other dogs. They get walked on lead, they're prevented from getting to other dogs. When they get to another dog, the build up to that has been so tremendous, that anticipation, that seeking system kind of, just, oh, other dogs, yeah, I'm so happy, that when they get to the other dog, they just can't reach because they're on lead. And you see this all the time when you go to dog parks or you go to beaches or anywhere where people have dogs on lead, where the two dogs are straining at the end of the lead, but they just can't make contact.
Mm.
If that happens often enough, the whole emotional context of the situation changes. And it's, oh, there's another dog. I love seeing other dogs, but oh, it makes me so angry because I can just never get to them. And then you have that explosion of rage. And people go, oh, no, he's aggressive on lead. So we can't let him, this is a problem.
Mm.
Now, I'm not saying, please just let me just clarify here. I'm not saying let every dog reactive dog off lead and see what happens. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just trying to make sure that people understand that very often, behavior isn't black and white, and emotions aren't black and white. It's a build-up of things. And the more you have emotional experiences in certain contexts, the more that becomes the flavor of that context. Um,
And this is an important point you're saying here because um, that response, this is not like you say, it's not about oh let's just let them off or whatever. It's understanding this the survival story that goes beyond that goes back in time. The thing that all those intricate individual experiences for that individual lived experience of that animal or that person. And that's what we have to move away from this notion that it is very as a very strict ABC in that moment, or that there's a very strict environmental thing that it must be about that. When in fact it's about a combination of a lot of things that build up to the point that those tolerance levels just are not there anymore. And when we think about mood state, how that animal or human has traveled into that place because that feedback, especially when we add in areas like the importance of secure attachment, social information processing theory, all these different things, they're not disparate. We can pull those strands together, especially through the MHERA kind of framework, really. And this is what I like because it allows us to do the anecdotal and the subjective
hmm.
in the moment, that study of one, as we say, but bring it back into an objective way of being able to measure it. And the thing with the seeking circuits and the frustration and the rage and that is it's clear to see for me a lot of dogs, when they have that kind of meltdown, if you like, it is a combination of, they're stopped from doing this, stopped from doing that. And I think perhaps the worst thing for the seeking circuits is when there is the promise of some outcome,
Yeah.
but that is taken away. I think you gave an example, if I remember rightly, of being in a car park and your seeking circuits are on now because you're looking for a parking space. Great.
Yes. Oh, you remember a lot. That's
Yeah,
impressive.
I because they hit home, because they're great. I've got my donut kind of analogy, which is a separate one. But I like this car park one. But we can visualize it because if you can't find a car parking space, you're going to feel a bit deflated. The seeking circuits are like okay, but you're going to want to find something similar to it, maybe parking somewhere else. But if you see the space, if your brain has decided I can have that space and you're waiting for it, and just as you go to pull in, somebody else pulls in front, you will experience those rage circuits very strongly. And I think this is something we have to be mindful about what we're doing through, without meaning to, through some areas of training where the brain is feeling there is a promise of outcome that never comes,
Mm,
which must be that it's the hardest thing to kind of grapple onto. You know,
absolutely.
Kira and I were in a, this is where my donor thing about, but Kira and I were in a restaurant, and he saw a shoe bun. There's one left. He thought, oh, God, I haven't had one for ages. A bit no, I'm gonna have that shoe bun. And then the woman in front of him, who we now refer to in quite unkind terms, even though she's just doing her thing, had that bun.
Oh no.
Kieran didn't let it go for hours, Karen. This is a grown man, because his brain had decided the bun was mine.
Yeah,
If that, so I think this is the problem, isn't it, about feeling that there is an outcome for that side of it. And but if that happened a lot over time, especially in relation to finding a return to safety, that seeking of those things that actually, or in relation to things that bring us comfort and joy and support, we can fall into that Q3 very easily and flip it
absolutely.
up and down to Q3, Q4 in that kind of space, really.
Yeah, I mean, the more important something is to the individual, the stronger the emotional response that it elicits, either
Yep.
obtaining or not obtaining it. Um, and it's if it's continually unavailable, you do, like I said, you do one of two things: you give up or you get angry. Um, and it's such a human thing. We all do it all the time, all
Mm,
the. But as soon as our dogs do it, then there's a problem.
yeah. And do you know what? It is that lack of awareness for the public, and even with some professionals, I think, who can get stuck in the notion of behavior change being the goal.
Yeah,
Especially if it's already been pre-prescribed. This is the outcome we're looking for. Um, those are those challenging cases where we never seem to get any traction because, as you say, for the individual, these things are important. And there is an element of us knowing stuff, but being humble enough to then think, but I want to know your stuff first. And Mira gives us that opportunity, I think, to get a better idea of of what it is we're supporting. I can't believe the time's flown by here. We've got 15 minutes left.
I know it's crazy.
It is crazy. So we need a part two, really, I think for sure. But uh, in this time we got left, Karen, the mic's with you. Take us wherever you want to take us in this. I think we've done a really good job of introducing people to the importance of Mira and the framework and what it is and how it is important for the application of what we do. But you can go anywhere you want with this now. The mic
I
is with
think
you.
so. For me, I think if people remember anything about tonight's talk, it's that there's a lot more that we have in common with our animals than we maybe realize. And for me, one of the most valuable aspects of Mira is you are speaking to people in a language that they can understand. You are using emotional terminology that they can identify with. What we've done with Mira is we've taken the remote distance. I'm not emotionally involved in this out of it, and we actually use that to help people to understand how their animals are feeling. Because for me, that is really, it's really hard to be mean to your dog um, when you understand that he's not being naughty, he's really struggling with these big feelings, just like you have big feelings that you struggle with. And I mean, I often think about my 12-year-old daughter, and I'm supposed to be the grown-up sometimes, and I look at this little person who some is now on the brink of teenagehood. Um, And one of the things that, given what I do, we talk a lot about feelings and we talk about how to deal with emotions and things like that. And it's so nice for me to see how what she's learned, how she's carrying that to the animals that she interacts with. I
Mm,
saw her the other day talking to her cat, and she was saying, I know you're having a really big feeling, but you can't be mean to your sister. And that kind of really just to me was one of the highlights of using emotions, not terminology, but
mm,
emotions to describe what animals are going through because it cultivates understanding and support and empathy. And I think if we can approach every animal through the lens of, I might not understand exactly what you're feeling, but I can understand that you are feeling things. It makes it a lot easier to step away from the I want the picture perfect behavior, or I'm looking at this behavior, I want to obtain this goal. It becomes more of a journey. And MHERA helps normal people do that because we use terminology that they identify with. Your dog is sad. Your dog is super happy to see you, and it's okay. And so for me, um, I like to empower people. I like to help people to understand better and do better without judgment. Because something else to remember, we talk about biases in animals. People have biases too.
yeah.
And a lot of guardians have tried many things unsuccessfully. And if you've continuously failed, and there's the guilt of your dog has a behavior problem because you're a bad owner,
Mm,
uh, social media can be, it can be a minefield sometimes. Um, we look at this not just from what is happening with the animal, but also how are you feeling? How are you contributing or not contributing or inadvertently placing emotions on your dog? And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but we want to make sure that clients understand that their biases, their actions can have an emotional impact on their animals and vice versa.
yeah. This is very important, and I think this is area that I'm interested in, of course, from the kind of human psyche side of that science side of things, because uh, part of our job really is to go through that process of supported awareness for them, because they have to have an awareness of their dog's care and support needs, which also means having an awareness of their own biases and distortions.
Yeah.
Because as we've discussed before, we know we're all kind of indoctrinated in that what we call the good bad continuum, and that that we want good behavior and we want less bad behavior, and we don't normally question that because that's how society's made us.
Mm,
Many of us are performative in certain ways with our behavior because it's expected of us. It doesn't mean we feel any more comfortable or any more safe, and actually it can be very damaging over time, of course. Okay, so I've got a question here from Mufasa. I think this is talking about when you're talking about how you look at the scoring. Do they have to score high in every category, or a bit of inconsistency can indicate personality difference?
Well, I think that's probably to do with the hedonic budget, if
Mhm.
I listen to the context. So the answer to this is it depends. I thought I would get through tonight without saying that, because that is normally my go-to answer to any question. So how the hedonic budget works is you've got different categories that we compare it to. So we've got type overall, which is our baseline kind of method of comparison where we're comparing all animals of the same species. I will say, all dogs, all elephants are supposed to spend 20 hours engaged in food acquisition behavior.
Yeah.
This individual, there are certain factors that influence individual variation, health, physical ability, all those kinds of things. Then you look at how much time are you spending currently engaged in the behavior. And there is no one perfect score. And it's not a case of the higher up on the graph you are, the better you're off. There is such a thing as too much of a good thing as well. So
Mm,
it's all about balance, really. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with the hedonic budget, is also to say, excuse me, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to engage in social play because you don't like other dogs. Okay, great. So you can't play with other dogs. What else can we spend more time on to ensure well-being that is available to you? Because not all dogs like other dogs. And you know what? That's okay. It's perfectly allowed. But we don't want to just scrap that and go, oh, well, you can't do that. We want to go, all right, now you've got an extra 3 hours per day on your hands, on your paws. What can we fill that? with that is productive. And so we are trying to adjust all of those systems so that they're in balance. So there's
Mm.
not too much reliance on one system and not enough on another.
Yeah, this is important, isn't it? And I think also if people want, we'll talk about how people can find more information and think about the book, especially the MHERA practitioner course, which I highly recommend. But you go into, especially with dogs, and we must mention, Karin, that dogs are only a bit of what you do. We can see animals behind you. You pretty well have
Yeah.
worked with most animals that we can think of, I'm sure. And that's what I love because one of my big passions is really getting people to think about emotional well-being, period, whether you're a snail or a raven or an elephant or a dog or a human. So many things connect us in this kind of process, really, about the importance of the individual's lived emotional well-being experience. But in relation to dogs, you go into considering even that what we would class as type dogs, the type of dog in relation to their kind of evolutionary maturity from up to more like a wild canid going
Yes.
through that. So when you talk about adolescent, it's not young, it's newer in that process, but even then these have specific things that we have to be mindful of, which goes beyond just breed necessarily, as in that breed, but thinking about them as that side of things, honing in more and more to that individual. And one thing that I think is important what you said there about too much of a good thing. Also, it's the motivator for those things because we know in human kind of emotional health that finding things that bring us, finding those things that we enjoy that bring intrinsic peace,
Yes.
as opposed to stuff that we're just escaping extrinsic pressure. There
Yes.
is a difference.
Absolutely.
And I think so we can see animals who engage in various things that are likely just finding relief from extrinsic pressures through that, not necessarily seeking it for intrinsic need, for intrinsic kind of peace.
Absolutely. And that's why I said in the beginning, because I often get asked, but where do you measure the bad stuff on the hedonic budget? And the answer is, well, we don't, because I want to focus on providing as many opportunities as possible to have that feeling of contentment, of enjoyment that is not always contingent on external influences. A dog who is so reliant on being with his person that when the person isn't there, life falls apart. That's not a happy dog. You know.
Mm,
So we measure all the things that not only comes from outside that makes you feel good, but also from an internal perspective makes you feel great, but also allows you to cope better when bad stuff happens.
and that's the key, isn't it? I think it's using that very simple analogy, but how, do we have enough in our cup?
Yes.
Um, you know,
And
um,
it depends on what you have in your cup.
exactly,
I
yeah. Mm,
I don't know if you remember, but one of the examples that I use is I don't know if you can see, I'm holding up a glass, right?
mm,
So it's a 500 ml glass. And I normally say to people, the thing about emotions is that negatively valenced emotions have a bigger impact than positively valenced ones. So imagine that you have a glass in front of you and you are putting a teaspoon of water in. And on average, it takes about 600 teaspoons of water to fill up the glass, right? If it's clear water, that means that you're looking at 500 good experiences, positively valenced emotional experiences that the animal has had. If you fill that cup up like 90% to the brim, and you take one drop of black ink and you drop that into that glass of water, what happens to the glass of water? The
mm,
color changes. And that is exactly what negatively valenced emotions do to mood state in general. So, by measuring and putting the emphasis on experiences that make you feel good, we are trying to fill that animal's emotional cup to the brim with
mm.
good things so that when the inevitable bad thing happens, it's damage control.
Yeah, damage limitation. Yeah, yeah. Yes, and I think this is very important when we think about life in general, really. Uh, this is one reason I'm not overly keen in some areas, or not very a big fan of the notion of healing through some areas of when we think about deep traumas, because that gives us a kind of an idea that somehow we've got a destination to be healed, that somehow we can be the same as before.
Yeah.
I think we have to recognize there's a great saying, which is, whatever happens to me today, who will I be tomorrow? And how aware will I be of that change? Because we just keep changing. A lot of it is about adaptations and how well we can adapt to some of those changes.
Yes.
And I think this is very important. If you have a pessimistic bias as an animal or a human, if you're over that left-hand side of the that graph, some of these challenges, even just psychologically, how we process them, how we adapt through them, become more challenging. And you said earlier, I didn't want to say it depends, but I think we just need to get that kind of tattooed somewhere and remember it, because it does depend. I struggle with some of the very arbitrary, strict measures of things that we look at, even in human therapies, let alone when we think about animals, because there will be elements that we share, but our own individual lived experience, that there is a richness to that we have to be better at finding out. And somebody says here, Kevin says, recently some of us had the opportunity to apply MHERA to wildlife, fish, and even a sloth. It was an amazing experience to watch these animals come alive with the novelty provided. Also, Cheryl says, MHERA is such an amazing tool to use in analysis of an animal. Thank you for the work you do, Karin. So much still to learn. Well, that's very true. So he says, great ink analogy. Fina says, hi, Fina. What is the difference between the MHERA practitioner course and the COPE diploma in dog behavior?
Okay, so the MHERA practitioner's course is basically for anybody who works with animals, whether you work with dogs, with cats. There are two different kinds of courses. So we've got the companion animal course, just for any kind of companion animal. And then we have for animals living in professional human care, where we're focusing more on mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. And so the COPE diploma is a course that takes you from beginning to end through with everything from learning theory to domestication to it's a qualification in animal behavior that starts you off from the beginning all the way through to the end. Whereas MHERA is specifically for people who want to focus on the emotional side of things. They want to learn the MHERA protocol. They want to learn how to apply it. They want to learn how to use the app. They want to use the method. And that
Mm,
is not restricted to um, anybody, really. Whereas with the COPE diploma, I know you need to have done previous courses. You need to have a certain level of knowledge already.
yep. Great. And I think one thing we should mention about COPE more generally, I think again, COPE as an education provider was ahead of the stream on a lot of these things,
Absolutely.
at a time when people were quite sniffy. So I think, but also, if I'm right in saying with the MHERA practitioner course, that still gives you the option of joining CAPT. Is that right? The
So it used to, but
Okay.
now what we've done is we've actually changed it a little bit because with the creation of the MHERA app, which I ran out of time to tell you about, but the MHERA app was basically designed to make it easier for people to do the assessments, to do the
Mm,
MHERA protocol, to apply it, and things like that. And so by creating the app, we wanted to tie that in with how I teach MHERA and how people
yes.
learn to go through the method. So we created a separate portal for that. And with that came all the technology that I do not speak this language, so please don't ask details, but the developer assures me that this makes perfect sense. When you enroll for the MHERA practitioner's course, it links you to give you immediate access to the app, and there's a whole bunch of technology stuff that goes on. And so it made a lot more sense to separate the two because we had a lot of people who wanted to learn about the method, but they didn't necessarily want to undertake the formal study that goes through an institute like COPE. And so
Got
that's
you.
why we created MHERA, the methodology, where it's got its own website, it's mhera.org,
Mhm.
where the courses are now hosted there, so that anybody who wants to learn, regardless of their background, regardless of what they want to use it for, they can learn it as a standalone at their own pace, gaining skills.
Got you. Got you. So let me type this in. So what's that address again? Web address for people to go to? Yeah.
www.mhera.org. MHERA.org.
Brilliant. There we are, folks. I'll pop that in. You can go there and find out more. Highly recommend the book. And I think, especially if watching this today, I think the book will flow back on the back of what we've discussed today. Do you know? I think I love your way of looking at these things, Karen. I love how humble you are about this. I love the gift that you've offered people and allowing people to kind of work through these things. And I know you do a lot of work in lots of different areas. You're going to be speaking at the Emotional Wellbeing in Animals conference online next year, so I'll be sharing that in the group soon. Well, thank you for tonight. It's been absolutely great. We must get back again and perhaps pick on one particular thread because I think any one of these threads we could dive in quite deeply on.
Spend
But
quite a
it's
lot
always
of
a
time.
joy. Yeah, well, thank you so much for tonight. Just to let everybody know, a couple of weeks from now, we've got Risa Van Fleet coming in. We're going to have a good old chat. I can't wait for that as well. Yeah, thank you for tonight, Karen.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It is always so much fun to talk to you, and we always need more time.
Always need more time, that's for sure. Well, thank you everybody coming, joining in today. We've had great kind of views, and that's great to see, considering we've been a little bit quiet for a while. Have a good evening or afternoon or morning, wherever you are in the world. And thank you, Karen. Speak to you soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Good night.